My name is Julie Kunstler. I'm Chief Analyst for Omdia, covering broadband access technologies with a focus on PON. And it's my pleasure to welcome the viewers to my interview with Jürgen Hatheier, Ciena's Chief Technology Officer for EMEA and Vice President of Strategic Sales. Jürgen and his team are enabling operators to transform their networks to become more agile and flexible, rapidly reducing time to deploy new technologies such as PON. Ciena has entered the PON equipment market at truly a unique time. Omdia is forecasting significant growth by a wide range of operators. Many of them are expanding their use of PON infrastructure beyond residential, using the same fiber-based access network for enterprise services and for xHaul transport, for example. We're seeing significant growth with major network builds and upgrades in Western Europe, North America, and numerous countries in Asia Pacific. Many operators are focused on 10G-PON, also known as XGS-PON, and several have already announced trials regarding 25G-PON. In parallel, we're seeing increased use of the cloud and software-defined access. We're seeing the importance of reducing latency and adding more security. Ciena is already a strong player with their solutions to operators. For example, Ciena is a leader in access switching and Ethernet demarcation. They were ranked #1 by Omdia in North America in terms of market share for 2020. In addition, Ciena is a very strong player in the carrier Ethernet switch market. Their customers include AT&T, BT, Comcast, TELUS, Windstream, among others. What's interesting is that Ciena's PON product strategy is really quite different from existing vendors. And with this, I want to take Jürgen's time and look at Ciena's product marketing strategy in some detail. So my first question, Jürgen, is why enter the PON market now from Ciena's perspective?
Thanks, Julie, and I'm really delighted to be here today, and I appreciate you setting the stage with the confirmation of our strategy. You are as excited about the PON market as I am, and everybody is at Ciena. As you know, we haven't entered the PON market just last week. We have actually released our first solution about 20 months ago with our SFP Plus 10G PON pluggables. It does fit nicely into our universal aggregation platform. So followed by the SFP plug back in February of 2020, we have followed up since with our own PON ONU. MCP is our orchestration and provisioning platform, which actually helps you to bring life into the hardware. So to manage not only residential and SOHO devices, but also enterprise-grade products, so which we are covering in the last mile in a very, very operationally efficient manner. And thank you for also calling us the leader in Ethernet access devices for many years. And really to answer your question now on why did we enter the market, actually our customers are the ones that not only are driving our strategy, but they're also helping us to verify certain moves that we want to make in the market. So really our Ethernet access customers have asked us why we would not want to consider upgrading our offering to also include shared fiber products. So XGS-PON, couldn't be a better fit at the moment for us. And as we look at GPON and DPON, which have been in the market now for over 15 years, they're somewhat running out of steam. And consumers are looking for higher tiers of bandwidth. Also the symmetrical option is quite important. And you also mentioned latency as a factor as well. And we can talk about latency specifically in more detail later. We expect that not only the applications become a whole lot more latency sensitive, but also the bandwidth expansion is going to continue to drive, a bit of evolution, but also revolution in that space. And you also mentioned we don't want to be a me too. So all of our PON solutions are really based on open, scalable architecture, which fits into our universal access and aggregation strategy.
So if you can talk a little bit more about your product approach. So by fitting into an existing solution, does that mean that an operator can easily add PON to what's typically been a point-to-point fiber topology and run it from the same software?
Yes, that's just one out of many use cases. And absolutely, Julie. So you can start using an existing access active Ethernet switch. You just put in a PON pluggable, and within our platform, we really create that seamless transition, not only to run both technologies in parallel, but also to provide the seamless operation for the NOC, for customer service, so that independently of what the access technology is, we can provide this holistic and universal perspective on the consumer. And what's very important for service providers is that the PON offering doesn't just stop at the broadband connections. So moving active Ethernet to XGS PON is one. But we support a large number of other applications as well, such as 5G backhaul, which, especially when we have small cells out in the field, help us to provide a cost-efficient, low latency and effective solution for the operator.
Can you talk a little bit more about low latency, the types of applications that are very sensitive to latency, and how your PON solution can help support them?
So absolutely. We all know how sensitive enterprises and business applications are to latency now with cloudification. So if you just think about the last 10 years, we have spent moving all the workloads from the enterprises from on-prem data centers into the cloud. And now with the edge cloud movement, it's somewhat coming closer again to the edge. And so it is essential that we really have a very low mean time to the cloud, as we would like to call it. And hence our solution helps with technologies such as Flex Ethernet in the backhaul to reduce latency on the span for up to 60%. So independent if you use access technologies such as PON or dedicated Ethernet, it's how you structure and architect the backhaul to ultimately deliver the very low level fast switching and routing environment that gets you best latency. But even for our residential customers, if I just may expand on that for a moment, gaming, security, conferencing, like you and I are just speaking from right now on a video conference, these offers are calling for low latency, high reliability. Just 18 months ago, overnight, we created hundreds of millions of these home offices. Many of them are still suffering because they don't have this PON-like experience. And if we want to bring a real office experience into every home, that's where the focus of service providers, but also governments in Western Europe specifically, is to put a lot of money on the table, build out those fibers to the home, and provide that competitive edge in every part of the country.
How or why, perhaps I should say, are operators looking at expanding that fiber access network beyond residential? Like, why now, do you think? Do you think it's has a lot to do with better economics to reuse the PON infrastructure? Is it more confidence in low latency and improved security? Because we've been talking about the use of PON beyond residential for many years, as you can tell by the color of my hair. I've been talking about it for a very long time. But it seems like it's only gaining momentum more recently. There were service providers who began quite early about the use of PON beyond residential, but there were very few.
So the time is now, Julie, because a lot of factors are coming together at once. So we have a lot of technologies which are running a little bit out of steam, as I said. So GPON and EPON have done a great job in the past, and they have already operated on the fiber that will be with us on the last mile for the next couple of decades. But even if you look at DSL or the good old cable networks that are running DOCSIS, all these networks have provided quite phenomenal performance over the last decades. But if you look at an upgrade, let's say from a cable-operated DOCSIS 3 to DOCSIS 4 network, you need to go and upgrade the outside plant as well. That's very cost intense. It interrupts customers, and it's only a one-step function. So the business case now starts to come together where a lot of these services transitioning to fiber to the home makes sense. And I'm not going to say that this is going to be a rip and replace, but the strategies of our customers that we are talking to is along the lines of, cap and go with maybe an overbuild on certain architectures where PON is then the first choice. And thirdly, do not forget the sustainability aspect. A lot of the traditional networks have many power-hungry devices, like amplifiers in the field. And with fiber, really only we do have one point-to-point connection between a shared fiber network, where you have a very power-efficient blazing technology, XGS PON modems, and then one plug in the switches. That's it. So it's the economics of sustainability as well. And it's also about the technologies which are aging and they are in need of an upgrade. And then it's also the demand which is not going away. So we're still seeing 30% growth of traffic year over year after COVID, and that needs to be addressed. And I think that can only be addressed by fiber.
Yeah, I guess it's easy for us to forget that P stands for passive in PON, and that really does have its energy efficiency advantages along with fiber efficiencies. One last question for you, which is how will the pluggable approach, the pluggable solution approach that Ciena has taken, be able to support future generations of PON, whether it's 25G or 50G, or I should say, and 50G, and then eventually perhaps 100G PON?
So, of course, we are always looking forward. XGS PON is here today. And we have also been a founding member of the 25GS MSA group. So we are absolutely in tune with the new developments that are going on. And if you look at just the platforms, as soon as you have an SFP28 slot, here you go. 25 gig plug inserted and off you go. But we are also very close to the initiatives around high speed PON. So when you talk about 50 and 100 gigabit PON, we are watching actively what the ITU and the IEEE are doing. And we are also participating in Cable Lab's 100 gig single wavelength PON initiative. But we still have quite a ways to go, I would say, in order to have a mature, commercially viable offering for those high-speed PON areas. Especially things like that still need to be figured out are around backwards compatibility and how to operationalize it. So don't forget how long it took for XGS PON to really become adopted widely. It only became adopted widely really recently. So look at 25 gigabit PON, 50 gigabit PON, or 100 gigabit PON. It will take a while till the cost of optics come down to a level where we can really place it out in the field, make the business case, and roll them out. And while 10 gig might not sound much, it's still a lot of bandwidth. You only share it amongst maybe 16, 32 customers, 48. That still gives you pretty good capacity. Even if you would sell a 1 gig symmetrical tier, the oversubscription is something that all the service providers have really handled very well in the access. And if there isn't a speed test running at the same time at all customers, there will still be an unprecedented customer experience for every subscriber.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and by the way, I've even seen a number of operators reduce their plans regarding split ratios to be able to future-proof their networks even better. I mean, there was one large operator I spoke to recently who's looking at 1/16 just to simplify their network and ensure that they will always be able to meet the bandwidth requirements symmetrically for all types of customers. Jürgen, is there anything else you'd like to add that I haven't covered with you?
So Julie, I would just like to wrap up with a couple of thoughts around operational usability of the PON solutions in general. So PON, as we already discussed, doesn't only give you the advantages of a very good ecological footprint, low power consumption. You're also using a future-proof transport media, the fiber. You also create this customer experience with no active components, which means reduced outage times. And I also want to encourage people to look beyond the traditional ways of delivering those services. We at Ciena believe at open and scalable approaches, like the pluggables in this case. It is the way to go forward, and you don't want to go out, deploy a full chassis with low fill rates, only to find out later that you just need two more extra ports, and then the chassis is full, you need to go and do a big rip and replace. So all these things, we have been listening to our customers who have not only been on the journey with us to define the adaptive IP journey, they have been embracing it with us for over 10 years now. Our customers have also helped us to define a viable model that allowed us to go into the PON market coming in late. And carrying those services on a PON system like a secure enterprise, 5G backhaul for small cells or even macro cells, residential services with big traffic, that's what we do now. And I would like to invite people to open their mind, explore these alternate architectures which we are talking about, because there's a lot of business value in there. Money can be saved, it's very operationally viable, low touch way of running and operating the network.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Julie. It was a pleasure speaking with you today.